Hello creeps, Andy here, and today, okay, so it's been a minute since I've seen you, right? I just have not felt well the past month or so. So I know my schedule has been kind of all over the place, and today I just want to talk about books. I'm finally feeling better. I'm really excited to talk about books. So basically, a while ago, I had seen, I don't know if it was a trend going around or just the one video that I saw or where it's from, I don't know. But I saw a video where people were, or this person selected a book from each month of the year that was their favorite read. And I thought that this was kind of different than just picking the best books of the year, because you have some months where you read things that you really love and then other months where you read things that are just okay. So there's, you know, a variation. And so I thought that this was a fun idea, and I'm like, I gotta do that. Should I have done this 2 months ago? Yeah, probably. But hopefully it'll still be an interesting video and, you know, we can sit and talk still. I also think it would be really interesting if you guys left a comment of your favorite books from each month last year. And so we can just kind of have a list of everyone's favorite stuff. It's actually really interesting going through these. I basically just selected the books that were rated the highest from each month. So some of these are 5-star reads, other are 4.5, some are 4 stars. It just depends on the month and what else I read, you know, in conjunction with that book for that month. So yeah, we have an interesting variety. Some of these books I've talked about all year long. Others, I don't think I've really talked about that much. So I'm kind of excited to highlight other books that we maybe haven't discussed. There's also quite a variety in here. So I think that pulling these, I was really interested to look and be like, wow, I have some interesting tastes in reading. Oh, and also I was gonna select only one book from each month, and that was my intention behind it, but some months there were 2 or 3 books that were rated the same, so it was kind of hard to select, you know, my favorite of those, especially now that it's been a year and, you know, they're rated the same or as high as one. Well, you get what I'm saying. And there's gonna be some variety. It's mostly horror and thriller. However, I didn't include any extreme horror because they were not above. There weren't any 5-star extreme horrors in a month where I only read other books that were 4 stars, you know? If anything, they were just equal to the books that I read here for those months that I read them. And I just did a video on my favorite, or ranking all the extreme horror books that I read. So I figure, you know, I'll just keep them separate, and that way I don't have to give any disclaimers with any books. These are mostly horror, thriller, and then a few random ones here and there, but I'm kind of excited to do this. Let's jump in to January of 2023, a year and a month ago. My first book of the year that really surprised me was The Whisper Man by Alex North. Now, I did a video, if you guys have been around for that long, last June of my favorite books up until then. So if you've seen that video, some of these will be repeats, and this was definitely on that list. This one really blew me away. It really did kind of remind me, it reminded me a little bit of Silence of the Lambs type feel to it. You have a man who's in jail for murder, and then you also have this new killer who's going around killing, I can't remember, I know I've talked about this book recently. I still can't remember if it's a child killer or specifically boys, but regardless, I think it's young boys. They're being murdered, and so they end up going to this killer to see if maybe it's a copycat and they can get some information out of that killer. So I feel like, and even I think Alex North says this at the end in kind of a Q&A or something at the end of the book, where he says something along the lines of, anytime you have a cop that's questioning somebody in jail, it's going to feel like Silence of the Lambs, which is probably true. It's not really like that, but you do have the detectives that are trying to solve the case, and then you do have the children that are being abducted, and then the Whisper Man, that aspect of it is quite unique in that the reason they call him that is because the children hear them whispering outside of their bedroom before they're taken. And I really like books that kind of intertwine supernatural and reality, and you don't really know going into it if something supernatural is happening or if it's more grounded in reality, and you kind of just have to wait and see and find out what it actually is. So I have really enjoyed books like that, and I read quite a few actually this year. So you have the young boy who's acting very strange, and then his father who's kind of creeped out by him. Then you have the detective who's trying to solve the case, and you know, you have various plots intertwined into this one plot of this book. And it blew me away. I really was surprised by how much I enjoyed that one. Next up we have February, and there were two books that stood out to me. Tender as the Flesh by Augustina Vastrique. I've talked about this book so many times the past year. I know that probably you guys are sick of hearing about how much I loved this book, but I really, really did love this guy. And yeah, this book just gave me a unique reading experience that I've never come across before. I think that's what a lot of the books here have in common, is they're books that just made me feel a certain way that I've never felt before, and that was this book to me. It really is a fantastic read. It's about all animals being infected with this virus, and so we're unable to consume animals, so instead we start consuming humans and raising humans to be eaten. And yeah, it gets dark at times, and I think that it's kind of an interesting comment on a lot of things, and it's up to obviously the reader to find what their meaning is in the book. But I think that if you want to dig a little and find your own meaning, that's definitely a book maybe to look into. I really enjoyed reading that one a lot. It was very bleak, and I loved the mundane way that it was written, and it just made you feel really just gross and sad. And yeah, I loved that. The next one from February, which I think deserves an honorable mention, is The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. I loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. It's, I believe, his only other horror book since writing American Psycho, but correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, it was great. It was great. It wasn't as intense as American Psycho, but it is messed up, and his ability to write, it just is phenomenal. He's one of my favorite writers, and I do love his work. But I do think that in this particular case, the reason, well, there were a few things that I guess surprised me. One is that the main character is Bret Easton Ellis himself as a child in high school, a young man in high school. And so you have him as a character, and he's writing as if it's true and it's happening, and you have a serial killer on the side. It's almost also kind of like a coming of age story as well, where he's coming into himself and figuring out his relationships with people and who he is as a person. But you also have this added additional unreliable narrator aspect of it, which makes the book even more enjoyable for me personally. And you just get to see him spiral into becoming even more unreliable, and you just don't trust him at the end. And I think it's such an interesting way to write a book where the main character isn't necessarily likable, and as you continue to read, I think I've said this before, and a lot of the times you get closer to the narrator, but with unreliable narrators, you pull back. And to be able to write a book that's entertaining enough to keep the audience entertained and enjoy the read, but also kind of despise what's going on and hate the story and almost hate the main character, who is Bret himself. It was just such an interesting read. I don't think I've ever read a book like that before, and yeah, one of the most unreliable narrators I've read. Next, we're on to March, and I have two books here. One was Tess Gerritsen's The Surgeon. This book, again, really blew me away. It felt like reading Silence of the Lambs. You know, you have the cop and the serial killer, the bad guy, and so it did feel a little bit along that realm. These are the books that Rizzoli Isles is based off of, a TV show. I've never seen it, and this book was written, I believe, in the 90s, maybe early 2000s. So it's, yeah, 2001. So it's an older book. I had never heard of it before. It was $2 at my used bookstore. I just picked it up and read it, and I fell in love with it. I thought it was fantastic. And yeah, it's about this serial killer who murders women and steals their uteruses. It goes into a killer who was killed by one of his victims, and then we have someone else who it seems like is a potential copycat of that person, and that victim who ended up killing the original killer gets intertwined in this new killing and this new serial killer as well. And then you have, again, the cops on top of it who are trying to work things out. So I thought this book was fantastic. And again, you know, books are so personal, and it depends on on everything, how you feel, how you're feeling that day, what you're interested in reading. And so yeah, I just think it's kind of interesting to go through and talk about these things. I've had people leave comments making fun of me because I like that book and stuff, and some of the other books, oh, I'll for sure get made fun of for liking, but they're books that evoke emotion for me, and that's a great thing. That's what books are supposed to do. So that's why these are on the list. They just made me feel different than other books have. The next one I have here is Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. So this is, again, is our second March book, but this book really surprised me. It was really freaking interesting. It's one of the first exorcism type books. It was written in the 60s, so it was pre The Exorcist and things like that. So it definitely, I think, paved the way for a lot of them. I don't know if it was the first one that's ever been written, but it's also very mild in the exorcism department. It's not like reading The Exorcist. So I think that might be why it's not a book that's talked about, because people go into it thinking that it's an exorcism book, and that part is very mild. It actually is a lot of things. It's about a young girl who goes to a church and priests help her because she's possessed, but it's so much more than that. It's about the relationship between the father and the daughter, and the daughter and the church, and the church and the public. I think it's a comment on a lot larger issues than just possession, and I really liked this book. It's also a little bit of horror, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of thriller. It kind of has everything in it. I didn't know what to expect going in, and I loved that one. So now we're on to April, May, June. Yes, okay, so I have two books again for April. So the first one was Stephen King's Salem's Lot, and I really enjoyed this one. This one's about a bunch of vampires that take over a town called Jerusalem's Lot, and a man goes back, right? He goes back because he had lived there when he was younger, I think. It's been a really long time. So he wants to stay at this old mansion to write a book about it. But then people start disappearing, and then, you know, it's a vampire book. I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying that. But the vampire stuff is very mild in this book. It's really not, you know, anything that we haven't read before as an audience in 2023. But this, I believe, was written in the 70s, so I can see why it would have been 75. So I can see why it would have been unique and fresh and new back then. It's nothing necessarily new that it adds to the vampire genre nowadays, but it's still just a fantastically written book. The story, the characters, this book is so heavily reliant on character development. It's really impressive the way that he can write about an entire town and keep everything straight in the reader's head. And yeah, I mean, it's a large book, and it was really entertaining to read. Just, you know, not, I don't think, blew me away in the sense of the vampire aspects of it, you know? But if I would have been around in the 70s and read it, I'm sure I would have felt differently. The next one is Ira Levin's This Perfect Day. This was another one that I really enjoyed. Ira Levin is the writer of Rosemary's Baby, and I also adored that book. I didn't read that one this year. I've read that in years prior. And this is more of definitely a science fiction type book. There's this thing called the family, and they pump you full of drugs and just kind of keep you baseline zombie, I guess, and it's about people that try to break out of that system and what that means, and, you know, if it would be better if they were there, or if it would be better to just stay in the family. This one, again, is one that I think that you can analyze further and kind of come to your own conclusions, but I think it was a really interesting story and a great science fiction book. One of my favorite science fiction books that I've read last year, definitely. So yeah, I thought I would include that one because I ranked those the same. The next one's going to be no surprise because I've talked about this one all month. This one is Black Mouth by Ronald Malfi. This is my first Ronald Malfi book, and it blew me away. It was a 5 out of 5 star read. I loved this book. I adored it. I thought it was fantastic. One of the best books. Unfortunately, it's one of those where you can't really give too much away. You kind of have to go in not knowing much, or at least that's how I went in, and I enjoyed it. So, you know, I think that's probably the intention of the writer, because the back doesn't really tell you too much. It's just basically about this man who goes back to, well, he's struggling with addiction, and he goes back to his childhood town to meet up with some friends to uncover some things in childhood that maybe they've neglected to come to terms with, and they, you know, go on this journey together. And I'm going to talk about this one in a future video, probably in more than one, because I love this book so much, but I won't say too much else about it other than this book really did blow me away. It was again one of those where you're like, is this supernatural? Is it not? And you kind of it's this balancing act. And then it is really brutal at times. And then it also is very emotional at times, and it deals with addiction. And so I think that if you have maybe somebody that you know that's struggling with addiction, it's kind of a hard read in that sense as well. And so yeah, I really connected with the story. I thought it was fantastic. I loved every page of it, and it's one of the best horror books that I've ever read. Okay, next up we're moving on to June, which is a little random here. We have Kurt Vonnegut's Mother Night. This book I loved so much. It's about a man who spreads propaganda in World War II for the Nazi Party, and he says horrible things, and he's an American that lives in Germany during this time. And then it's about his life after the war, and you come to learn that he, through his messages of propaganda, he was actually helping the Allies and giving messages to the Allies, but you never really know his stance, and there's really a blur of morality in this book, and you just really don't know where the characters stand, or it's just a really mind-fucky type of story. And then you just, at the end, don't really know how to feel about the ending. And yeah, there's a lot going on in this book, and I think just, you know, shows how great of a writer Kurt Vonnegut is. This might be my favorite Vonnegut book, tied with Slaughterhouse-Five, but man, I really did love that one. And then the next one I read also in this month was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, another one where I have never read a book like this before, and it just struck me in a way that other books haven't. I also really connected with the main character. He is kind of stuck questioning his life. He's, you know, an older man. He has a wife and a kid, and he often wonders what life would have been like if he hadn't pursued family and stuck with his career, because he's a scientist. And he gets abducted, taken away from his family, and he just tries to make his way back to them. But it's so much more than that. I can't even express how much more this story is, but I don't want to give anything away, but it is very science fiction-esque. But there's also some thriller thrown in there as well. It's in the thriller section, but I do feel like his stories lean more towards sci-fi, but that might just be me. One of the best books that I've ever read. I saw this one everywhere and everyone kind of picking it up. I didn't see people talking about it, but I just saw it in a lot of pictures and things. And so I'm like, man, this book's everywhere. And I picked it up, and Blake Crouch, I think, is one of the most original writers that I've read in a really long time. I think he's one of the best, definitely thriller writers of this generation, but sci-fi as well. Great book. That's one of those where I feel like if most people pick it up, they'll enjoy it, you know, and I don't feel like that about a lot of books, because it's all dependent on taste. But yeah, his books are really amazing. And the next one, July, I have 3 books here. I have Carela by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. This book was amazing. One of the best vampire books I've ever read. It's just so atmospheric. It was first published in 1871, so a really old vampire book. In fact, the 3rd vampire novel ever written. So yeah, it's an old guy, and just really cool to see kind of where the genre of vampires began. Really atmospheric. It's about a young girl who becomes, well, she's very lonely, living kind of off the grid with her dad in this large house, and a young girl has the means to stay with them, and she gets very excited, and so this young girl stays with them, and they end up becoming friends. But when she does, some strange things start happening around the town, and it was just kind of cool to see things that are in our modern day vampire stories told in this book from the 1800s, and even some pretty graphic scenes as well that I was really surprised to read in there. And just an awesome book all around. Really awesome. I think eventually I will read that one, and we'll do a whole video about that, because it deserves its shining moment. It really is a great vampire story. But next up here I have The Stranger by Albert Camus. And this one is a fiction story. Albert Camus was a philosopher, and I believe this one was written in the 50s. first published in 1946. There's a lot of things to pick apart in this one. Man, this is one of my favorite books ever written, and it's one of those, again, where you got to read it and kind of dig under the surface for the meaning. But on the surface, it's just about a man living his life, and it's split into two parts: before he commits a murder and after he commits a murder. And he just does not care about anything. He is one of the most interesting narrators that I cannot understand, but it's one of the most interesting books that I've ever read. And what's so interesting about it is that reading about his life before he commits murder and after he commits murder, nothing changes. He is still the same person. He still doesn't care. This story is so interesting, and yeah, written by a philosopher, so I'm sure that there are a lot of different ways that you can read the story and pick it apart. So fantastic read. And next, another one, Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I'm sure I don't have to go into too much information about this one. Everyone knows what Fight Club is about. But it's about a man who meets another man called Tyler Durden. They start a fight club. Things just spiral and get out of hand. I'm not going to go too much into this one. I have a whole video talking about the geniusness of this book, so I will leave that video linked down below if you're interested in just hearing me ramble for 20 minutes about how much I love this. But yeah, I revisited that one this year and was able to pick more apart out of it and find more meaning for me than the book held even before. And it's always been a book that I've loved, but yeah, wow, I really loved that one. Okay, next up we have The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This one surprised the crap out of me. And if you have a thriller book that surprises me, it's going to be high on my list. I don't often love thrillers as much as the average person does. I find them very predictable. I find them very similar. There aren't a lot of redeeming qualities for me for thrillers, and this one surprised me. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the main character. She's a woman who had a traumatic experience when she was younger at a camp. All three of her roommates left one night when she was sleeping and never came back. And so you see her as an adult now. It's 20 some odd years later, and she's a painter, and she always hides these girls in the forests that she paints, kind of to pay, I guess, homage to them, or maybe to demonstrate that she's not over what happened when she was younger. At any rate, the camp opens back up and she goes back kind of to wrap up loose ends and just find some closure that she never got as a child. She ends up finding some things that were hidden a long time ago, because the camp closed down after the three young girls went missing. And so she starts again to try to unravel the mysteries of what happened to her three roommates as a child. But I think I like this story on a lot of levels. I think it surprised me as a thriller, but I also did like the idea of this woman character. I thought he did a great job writing about what it's like to not really fit in as a young girl and finding some cool older girl to like fall in line with and do anything that they say because you just want to be around them and be around the cool girls. And I don't know, I really enjoyed the character. I also liked the idea of kind of going back and facing the past traumatic experiences from your childhood and trying to find a closure. So anyways, yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I think that was probably one of the better thrillers that I've read this year. Next, it's probably not a surprise, Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. This book brought me to tears, I'm not gonna lie. This is another one very heavy in the emotion department, and it deals a lot with grief and loss and guilt and everything that comes along with that. And I'm just a sucker for any story that can put into words how I feel or how I felt going through all of those things. So it's about a man who loses his wife. He comes to find that there are some strange things hidden after she passes away that she kept hidden from him, and so he goes to investigate and kind of try to figure out why she was looking into these strange things and what it actually means. But the story's so much more than that. I mean, it really is just about love and loss, and this story did make me cry. I bawled reading that one. Next up here, so this is October, I have two books, and they are very different. The first one was Recursion by Blake Crouch, and this is another one that fucked me up. I mean, talk about existential dread in the middle of the night. Oh my gosh. This is about two people. It's about a scientist and a detective. There's this new thing that's going around. They don't know if it's a virus or what, but people are imagining lives that never happened. So they'll wake up and remember an entire life married to an entire human who does exist, but doesn't know them. And so people are like taking their lives because of it. It's causing a lot of issues. And so both the scientist and this detective are trying to figure out what is going on. And it is, again, one of the most unique books. If you want anxiety, if you want to stress out, if you want existential crisis, read this book. It really did fuck me up. It really did. But it's one of the most unique books I've ever read. I love Blake Crouch books, and I think those two are my favorites of the books that I've read from his so far. Yeah. So yeah, great book. And then this one, so far in left field, a cozy mystery. The first round of cozy mysteries I've ever read was this year, and this book did something for me. What this book did was bring me back to the joys of originally reading books, like finding the magic as a young teen in books. That's what this book did to me. And so this is Bobbing for Bodies, but it's by Addison Moore. It's called Murder in the Mix. That's the series of books that it is. And there's like 50 and they're still being written. I just love these books. Okay. So they're little cutesy tales about this little baker who lives in this cute town in Vermont, and she just solves a murder, but everyone is super hot. All the men are super hunky. All the girls are gorgeous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Every month a new murder happens, and every month the same baker finds the dead body, and people either think it's her or think it's her friend that did it. And so she has, you know, this thirst for justice, and she must figure out who the murderer is. And every month she solved this murder faster than the cops do. So like, it's so far out of the realm of reality. And I'm not a huge fan of cozy mysteries, at least the ones that I've read up until this point, but this one is so cute I could throw up. It's just a book that brings me back to the magic of reading as a child. It really does feel like a book for children, but written for adults, if that makes any sense. It's so cutesy, and it just makes me happy. That's all I can say. So I am totally down for anybody making fun of me for reading those. I do not care. I love them so much. But yeah, adorable. Just the cutest thing ever. If you just want a feel-good book, that is one for you. Okay, I'm getting tired here, but we only have 2 months left. So November, I again have a very strange collection of books here. I have Darcy Coates' Whispers in the Mist. Now, this is the third in the Black Winter novel series, so not one that I would just suggest picking up, but I do recommend the series in general. This was actually the first series that made me realize that I'm okay having romance mixed in with my horror. Didn't know that I liked that before I started reading these books. I love the characters. There's two, a woman and a man, and they meet kind of in the middle of the downfall of society. The world is falling apart, and we're going into this like apocalyptic nightmare where there are these creatures who are killing people. Whole towns have gone radio silent. People go in and they don't come back out. And slowly through these novels, you start to unravel the story of what happened and what is causing everything that's going on. But you have the same two main characters throughout the story. So the first one is more romance, kind of love story-ish. The second one is more action adventure, and this one, there's some heartbreaking stuff in here, but I could not put this one down. I mean, I love Darcy Coates' books in general, but I think I read a lot of the really great ones last year, and this year I read more of her first books, you know, like I went back and read more of the first published books, and a lot of them just supernatural stuff, and it's just not my genre. A lot of haunting books kind of let me down. And so yeah, I'm really excited that I got to read the third in this one. This one blew me away. I loved it. I could not stop thinking about the apocalypse. I could not stop thinking about the characters. And I asked my husband, I was like, I don't know what to read. This was probably last month. I'm like, can you go and pick a book off my shelf? Any book you want. And he brings me the fourth one, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I cannot say goodbye to these characters yet, because I think it's the last of the series. I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to say goodbye to them. And so I hope she continues to write the same characters, but I have a feeling the fourth is the final one. And so I'm not ready to say goodbye to them. They're characters that I think about often, and I hope that they're well in their apocalyptic world, and I hope they stay there and live there forever so I can continue to read about them. But yeah, I love the characters. I love the books, and this one, yeah, really did blow me away. And the next one was George Bataille's Story of the Eye. This one was originally published in 1928, and it is an interesting journey. It's definitely a book outside the realm of what I typically read. It's not horror or thriller or anything. I believe it was written, I believe he was also a philosopher, if I'm not mistaken. And so there's a lot of philosophical elements that you can pick up on if you know about that kind of stuff. But I'm just a horror reader and was interested in reading this story. So I did pick it up, and I do think that it's one where I'll definitely have to revisit and you know, pick apart further. But for the first read around, it really did catch my attention. It was unlike anything I've ever read before, and it's just kind of an erotic novel, I believe is what it's categorized under, and it's just a debaucherous tale of this young couple and sleeping together and murder and all sorts of strange stuff. I didn't analyze it from a philosophical perspective, but I did read it from a literary point of view, and it was a really interesting read. And so, yeah, I'd really like to read about that further and see what else it means to me. But let's go to my December books. A few here. Let the Right One In by John Lindquist. This one surprised the crap out of me. I loved this book. We're quickly running out of daylight. Sorry, I hurt my back sleeping. I'm an 80-year-old woman, so But we're running out of daylight, so I'm gonna try to fly through these last three. But this one was so amazing, and I know I've seen one of the movies a long time ago, but it is nothing like the book. And this book does get pretty messed up in parts for a horror book. There's some scenes where I was like, oh, and I've read some messed up stuff in the past year. So it gets dark and twisted, but it's basically about a story of a young boy who doesn't quite fit in, and then a vampire young girl moves in next door to him. That's kind of the basis. But you have so many other characters, and there's so many different interesting viewpoints to view this novel from. Every character in the book is a protagonist and an antagonist to different people in the story. So the young boy is good to some people and then horrible to other people. And so it's just a really interesting read. I've never read a story quite like this before. It's definitely a lot more character based, and the vampire part is minimal. I guess it's not minimal, but I would say that the vampire in itself does feel to me a little bit more like an analogy, and you kind of just get to see how people's lives, I mean, nobody lives a great life in this book, and the characters aren't necessarily likable. I mean, you can feel for them in some ways, but in a lot of the ways you kind of just pity them. And I think for me it was a lot of just like who you surround yourself with and the choices you make in life. And the vampire element was almost a metaphor for me for like, I mean, let the right ones in, like you know, it depends on the people that you surround yourself with for how you turn out in life. And so I loved that book. I thought it was fantastic. The next one that I loved, this is The Night Parade by Ronald Malfi. And I would say that Come With Me and Black Mouth are top, and then The Night Parade was maybe right under that. I think I love his books because they evoke a lot of emotion, and you really do get to see I think the writer's pain through his work, and I love books like that. And so this was no different. However, this one was more of a relationship between parents and children, and I don't have children, so I felt less connected to the story than I may have had connection to the other two stories that you know really got to me. But nonetheless, still a fantastic book. Oh my gosh, this book was amazing. It's about a virus that just takes over. It's an epidemic that takes over the US. Whole towns are destroyed. So many lives are lost, and you really do get to see how this starts up. Like you get to see the beginning of this epidemic, which is so interesting, and some of it is eerily similar to the pandemic that we experienced, and just like people freaking out and not knowing what to do and not trusting anyone, and you know, things like that. And then you have things that are way different from our pandemic, what it does to people, and it kind of messes with you mentally more so than physically. And it's a very interesting read. It's also at the core more of a story between a father and a child and what you would do for your kid. And yeah, a really great book. But of course we cannot end this video without talking about The Wager by David Grann, because this book was fantastic. This is a book about sailors in the 1700s, and 1742. They go along on this mission to try to intercept these Spanish ships. I mean, horrible things happen throughout. It's like a fleet of ships, and one of them well, this one that we follow gets shipwrecked. It's a true story, and it's about mutiny and murder and cannibalism and all sorts of crazy things and scurvy and, oh man, just what these sailors had to go through. But you get a lot of accounts from the sailors, from their actual logs, and it's a story that I've never heard before. It's a story that I think a lot of people haven't heard before, and so I'm really thankful to writers like this who take the time to search through so much history and personal accounts of things to write a cohesive novel that's entertaining, engaging, horrifying, and yeah, amazing story of perseverance and loss, and just a great book. That one's a nonfiction. So yeah, those are my favorite books of each month. I hope this video was helpful in some way. I don't know. Maybe this video was more for me than it was for you, but I just wanted to come back and talk about books because it's been a minute. So hopefully from now on, I'll have videos up more consistently, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Please feel free to leave your favorite books of each month of last year down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye guys!
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.